Morning. You guys doing okay? It's a beautiful day. I mean, I always try to psych myself up and tell myself that winter lasts till Easter, and it basically did this year. Man, it's really good to be together, guys. Today we're celebrating the resurrection of Jesus. And if you're new with us, and maybe you're new to the Bible, I just want to introduce the Bible really quick before we dive in. So the Bible is kind of broken up into two parts. You got the Old Testament and the New Testament. The Old Testament tells the story of how God created the world and how he gave a perfect place to humanity and met all of their needs. But kind of like the current humans that live in the world now, the ancient humans that first lived in the garden also wondered this thing that we often wonder in our hearts, which is God holding out on us? You know, that feeling like maybe God is actually some cosmic killjoy and not really like the source of all life. And when they rebelled against God, the Bible says that sin entered in the world. Now, sin is not just behavior problems, even though you've got some, okay? I know because the people that brought you told me. But also because we all do, okay? Everybody has them. But it's more than just that. It's like a disease that gets into the world, actually affects the whole earth and the cosmos. And so it's not just something that's easily going to be dealt with by modifying your behavior and just like stop dancing and stop going to rated R movies and stop doing all these things, right? That's not going to fix your problem. It's not going to fix inside. And so the Bible then tells this story of God basically choosing a people that becomes a nation of people. He gives them laws. He gives them these promises that there's going to be a prophet that's going to come that's actually going to change their heart so that they can follow the laws that God's given them, because they don't. And there's going to be this king who's going to rule forever, except the kingdom that they have like falls in a really awful way, and the dynasty is over and they're carried off into exile. And so you're left wondering at the end of the Old Testament, how are all these stories going to like work? How is God going to come through? And as Christians, we believe that Jesus actually is a continuation of that story, and that he is the anointed one, that prophet, the king. He's the one that actually brings all that stuff together. So Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are the first books of the New Testament, and they tell the story of Jesus' life and his teaching and his death on a cross, which you may or may not have heard of, but that, pass, and then he also resurrects from the grave, which is where we find ourselves today. And Christians, we really believe that Jesus physically resurrected from the grave. Okay? I want you to think about this with me. I'm from Lena, Illinois. No, I didn't say Galena. It's a common mistake, okay? It's smaller and substantially less cooler than Galena. And if you know where Lena is, it's on the way somewhere, right? Okay? That's where it is. Like, you're either going to Chicago or Rockford or maybe even Freeport if you're having a particularly bad day, but you never make a pit stop at Lena, okay? That's where I'm from. Now, I want you to imagine somebody I went to high school with who inherited his dad's construction business, starts teaching people how to live, and starts telling people he's God, okay? He's able to get some followers, and mostly those kinds of people that live in Lena, and the surrounding areas, good people, salt of the earth kind of people. But we Dubukers might say not the most educated people. People from Lena, sorry that you're watching this. But you know what I'm saying? So like he amasses this group of followers. He's able to convince these people. And we all know what's next. He's going to buy a farm somewhere. He's going to start a commune. And we'll all be watching the Netflix special in 5 years, No one else. No one else got on that cult kick for a while. Just me and my house. So, yeah, it's weird. And I tell this story to illustrate that 2,000 years later, give or take some years, 2,020 years or so, here we are gathered together in Dubuque, Iowa, to worship this man who was a carpenter, basically inherited his dad's construction business from a small know-nothing town, kind of like Lena, Illinois, called Nazareth, where even his own followers wondered out loud in the Bible recorded, can anything good come from Nazareth? I don't think so. And he started telling people that he was God. And he started wandering around the outskirts of these small towns in Israel, avoiding the city centers until he kind of focused on the city centers, and then they killed him. Which wasn't an uncommon thing, to be crucified by the Roman Empire. See, actually, when Jesus was alive, Israel was actually under control of Rome. You may have heard of Rome before, right? You got some Western civ in there. Can any of you name any of the emperors of Rome? Caesar? Okay, great. Yeah, okay. I know some of you probably are studying this right now. You might be able to name a few. But can you name anybody else from that century? Anyone else that maybe grew up in Nazareth? Or any other small town in ancient Israel during the Roman Empire? I don't think so. There were a bunch of people that inherited their father's construction business, and there were a bunch of people even that said they were God and amassed some followers. In fact, there were actually 70 or so people who claimed that they were the Messiah before Jesus. Do you know any of their names? My guess is no. You want to know why? Because they amassed some followers, they got some people together, they were able to convince people they were God, and then they were killed, somehow, crucified maybe even. And so this story that we're reading up until this point that we arrive at is basically like every other story. Especially from that time. A lot of people were claiming to be God. They just didn't have Netflix specials back then, so we can't watch these. He actually said of himself that he was peace. Not just like that he would bring peace. He said, I am peace. I am the bread of life. I'm the living water. So that you actually won't go hungry and you will never get thirsty again. You cannot say stuff like that and just become like a good teacher that kind of fades into oblivion unless you can somehow back it up, what you've said. There has to be something about what happened. I had a long talk with my brother recently. My brother and I grew up in the same house, both grew up in a Christian house, and my brother recently has kind of, deconstructed his faith. This is a fancy word to basically say kind of taken apart all these things. And he's wondering, not so quietly, that maybe Jesus doesn't have anything to do with normal life anymore, but he still kind of likes some of the ideas of Jesus. And so I just ask him, and this is the same question that I want to ask you. What about the resurrection? Like, what happened? Because something happened. There's something had to have happened so that more than 2,000 years later, here we are still talking about the same guy. Some construction worker from Nazareth. Like, something happened. There had to be something happen. And so serious people that study history have actually tried to offer some explanation as to what happened. Because what you cannot deny is that a small group of people either saw something and something happened, or they pulled off the greatest hoax in the history of mankind. I mean, seriously, right? It's incredible. If those guys pulled it off, here we are, a bunch of idiots gathering together on Sunday morning. And so I just want to propose to you some ideas. I want you to know that there are some thoughts here. But first, I want us to hang our hats on this quote today from C.S. Lewis. And this quote, I think we have it, Alan. The C.S. Lewis quote is, this is where I want us to hang our hat today. And this is one of our best thinkers on the issue. And I need you to make a decision today. I am begging you to make a decision. Christianity, if false, is of no importance. Okay? So you got one option. Reject this thing and get as far away from here as possible. If it's true, it's of infinite importance. The only thing that it cannot be is moderately important. All right? So if you believe that Jesus actually got up, then the one thing you can't do with that is be like, I guess Jesus resurrected or whatever. Okay? That is not an appropriate response. It is like an uncritically thought through response for the way you're going to live your life. And so I want you to know there's some ideas about what happened on this day. Because if you're committed to studying history in any kind of way, you know that the Roman Empire ended, right? The most powerful empire that's ever been and existed basically was undone by a movement of love by people that never picked up any kind of swords or weapons. They overthrew the most powerful empire that has ever been. Something happened. So what do people think happened? Smart people that are trying to make sense of this. The first thing is that they think the disciples went to the wrong tomb. Right? They woke up, they were very upset, which you would be if somebody close to you died, right? And you just like went to the wrong graveside, and when you got to the graveside, they had just dug that hole for somebody else, and you're like, Grandma's alive somewhere, right? Nobody. Anybody think that this is possible? Don't you think anybody could have just said, hey, I think that's the wrong place. Like, it seems like it'd be really easy, especially for the Jewish leaders, to be like, I think we can produce a body here to end this discussion. The other thing that people think is that the disciples hallucinated the resurrection, okay? Maybe they had some psychedelic mushrooms or something in ancient Israel, and they all dropped acid together, or they were really sad. You know, this happens sometimes. When people die, you will sometimes hear people say things like, oh, a bird flew by. That must be so-and-so, right? Because when we're hurting, we do try to derive meaning out of things. So this does kind of happen sometimes, right? And maybe even one person might see their dead relative, you know? Okay, but here's the struggle with this theory is that the disciples had a collective experience. They all saw him. So I know you may probably not know a lot about psychedelic experiences, but I lived in Mexico and people come there for like psychedelic tourism, okay? And this is a true story. They take mushrooms together and they have like a person that guides them. Nobody has the same trip, all right? It just doesn't work like that. It doesn't matter if there's a guide. It doesn't matter. There is no way that the disciples hallucinated this. And plus, 500 people saw Jesus over the course of 40 days. And those people were still alive when the Gospels were written, which said that Jesus got up. It'd be very easy to say, like, I think we saw him more like a spirit. The other one is the swoon theory. This is like, Jesus was a carpenter, so basically he was like one of those like CrossFit ultra athletes, okay? Because stuff was heavy back then, all right? So everyone imagine ripped Jesus, okay? But ripped Jesus was crucified, but he didn't die. He blacked out. He was mostly dead, if you've seen Monty Python. But then he got better. And he went to his disciples. He got up out of the tomb. He rolled away a stone, which was designed for two really strong people to roll away. But again, this is CrossFit Jesus. He moved the stone. He went to his disciples, and he said, I've raised from the dead. But he still would have had all of the wounds that were associated with his crucifixion, which is that Jesus was flogged actually before he was crucified. Most people almost die of the flogging. And so Jesus was flogged, then crucified, and somehow survived the whole ordeal and came back. It is impossible that Jesus could have convinced his disciples that he had somehow conquered death by coming back from the grave if he showed up and he basically passed out as he like walked into the room with them. The other thing that seems more plausible is that the disciples knew that Jesus said he was going to raise from the dead in 3 days. He did actually say that a couple times, even though it seems pretty clear that the disciples did not get that. They didn't catch the memo. But they believe, some people, this is an early theory that was circulated by the Jews, that they faked it. The disciples broke in, they stole the body. Now grave robbing was common in those days. But here's my problem with that. All of the disciples fled the scene when Jesus was crucified, except one who was there at the cross. Everybody else was gone. And I don't know if you've read the gospel accounts, but these are normal dudes. These are factory workers, construction workers. They are not the kind of people that could plan and execute something like this. So what the theory is that these disciples who all fled the scene, 3 days later, they all mustered up enough courage to go to the tomb, the middle of the night, they knock the guards out, they roll away the tomb, the stone, because at this point, the part of the narrative is that the people were nervous that the disciples were going to do this, so they actually added security to the tomb. They put 2 guards and a big stone in front of it so that it couldn't happen like this. So let's just say, just for instance, that these guys did this, okay? That they took Jesus' body and they did away with it somehow. They burned it or something, which would have been super against Judaism to burn the body. But they had to do something with it to get it out of the way. Here's the amazing thing. None of those guys break. All 12 of them basically give their life for this belief that Jesus has resurrected from the dead. 11 of them are killed in horrific ways because of their faith. One of them dies of natural causes, but he dies in prison because of his beliefs. Nobody broke. And on top of that, Jesus was able to convince his mother and his brother that he was God. Now, my mom's right here. Maybe if I was really manipulative, I could convince my mom that I was God. But let me just tell you, my siblings, no chance. All right? There's no chance my siblings are going to think that I'm God. So something happened. Something happened. And Christians have been saying for centuries that this one thing is a core belief. That Jesus had to get up in a physical form. He's not like a spirit. He's not like somebody that just shows up. In fact, the Apostle Paul, writing later to the church in Corinth in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verses 12 through 19, he says that if Christ is proclaimed as raised from the dead, now if Christ is raised from the dead, how can some of you say there is no resurrection of the dead? If there is no resurrection of the dead, then not even Christ has been raised. And if Christ has not been raised, then our proclamation, this whole thing that we're doing, it is just in vain. I mean, it's a waste of time. And so is your faith. Moreover, we are found to be false witnesses about God. Not only is this whole thing not true, I am in the profession of lying to you the whole time about God. Because we have testified wrongly about God, that he raised up Christ, whom he did not raise up. In fact, the dead then are not raised, for if the dead are not raised, not even Christ has been raised. And if Christ has been raised, your faith is worthless. You are still in your sins. Those then who have fallen asleep in Christ have also perished. If we have put our hope in Christ for this life only, we should be pitied more than anyone. So, 2 options. You can either reject this outright as something that's evil and coercive, basically trying to oppress people and keep them obeying some leader of something or other. And maybe if you're nice, you could pity us instead of just trying to hate on us all the time. Or it really happened and it's of infinite value and worth. What it can't be, and I am begging you not to make it this way, is just something that you just kind of think about sometimes every now and then. So what are our claims? What are Christians actually trying to say? There's three things that I want to draw attention to today that the resurrection means for us, which is that if the resurrection is true, then death is defeated, hope is real, and God's new world is beginning now. So first I want to read the passage of the resurrection story from John chapter 20. John chapter 20. This is from John, as one of Jesus' followers, and he was a first-hand witness. In this account, he calls himself the disciple who Jesus loved, and I want you to see there's going to be a foot race, so pay very close attention to who wins and how important that is to the story, okay? This is important stuff. So on the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene came to the tomb early while it was still dark, and she saw the stone had been removed from the tomb. So she went running to Simon Peter and the other disciple, the one Jesus loved, that's John, in case you're confused, and said to them, "They've taken the Lord out of the tomb, and we don't know where they've put him." So just to be clear, Mary, who's one of Jesus' disciples, is also, she's saying somebody took Jesus, okay? Because this is a very natural reaction when you show up somewhere and someone's body is gone, right? At that, Peter and the other disciple went out, heading for the tomb. The two were running together, and the other disciple outran Peter. See, I told you, it's important stuff here. And got to the tomb first. Stooping down, he saw the linen clothes lying there, but he did not go in. This is John. Then following him, Simon Peter also came. And Peter, in classic form, just goes straight in. He entered the tomb, saw the linen cloths lying there. They did not understand yet what was going on. The wrapping that has been on his head was not lying in the linen cloths, but was folded up separate by itself. Jesus is very neat, apparently. The other disciple who had reached the tomb first, they all went in and saw and believed. For they did not understand. The scripture said that he must rise from the dead. Then the disciples returned to the place where they're staying. This must be like a really intense situation, right? The person closest to you, who you believed was God, has just died, and then you go back to just kind of honor him, prepare his body. They would put spices on the bodies. They would wait for all the flesh to disintegrate, and then they would take the bones and kind of bag them up. And then you would have like a shrine, basically, and a holy man. So they're going to prepare the body. When they get there, there's nobody there. And Mary stood outside the tomb crying. Because can you imagine, insult to injury? Not only has your leader just been murdered, crucified by the people that you hate the most, the Romans, but then not only that, but somebody has like taken him, and now you can't even say goodbye properly. And so Mary is doing what all of us would do. She's crying. And as she was crying, she stooped to look into the tomb, and she saw two angels in white sitting there. Jesus' body had been lying, one at the head, the other at the feet. And they said to her, "Woman, why are you crying?" "Because they've taken away my Lord," she told them. "I don't know where they've put him." And having said this, she turned around and saw Jesus standing there, but she did not know it was Jesus. "Woman," Jesus said to her, "why are you crying? Who is it that you're seeking?" I love this. Supposing he was the gardener. Some worker showed up. And she replied, "Sir, if you've carried him away, tell me where you've put him, and I will take him away. I will handle this," Mary says. And Jesus says to her, "Mary." And something about the way he says Mary, turning around, she said to him in Aramaic, "Rabboni." Now, we don't have anything like this, but in Spanish, when you want to call somebody something special or nice, you kind of add like ito to it, right? Like amorcito, we would say. The word is amor, but like amorcito is like for people that are really close, all right? So the word here is rabbi. She calls him Rabboni because it's like a term of endearment, but also a term that she's giving reverence to him, which is great because that's how we should all worship, in reverence and in intimacy with Jesus. "Don't cling to me," Jesus told her, "since I have not yet ascended to the Father, but go to my brothers and tell them that I am ascending to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God. And Mary Magdalene went and announced to the disciples, I have seen the Lord. And she told them what he said to her. And they said, great. No, that's not what happened. Actually, the resurrection of accounts of Jesus are kind of embarrassing for Christians, especially given the time frame. It goes to show if you're going to make something up, you would not make it up like this. Like Jesus' display of his power of his resurrection body is mostly by showing up at random places when the doors are locked and also eating fish just to prove he's not a ghost. It's like, prove you're not a ghost. He's like, I'm kind of hungry. You got something to eat? It's just very weird. And then on top of that, on top of all of those things, none of the accounts match. Have you read them lately? They don't match up, which either indicates that these guys just cannot get their stuff together, right? Or that something so crazy happened that everyone kind of remembers bits and pieces. Have you ever been in a situation like that where something kind of like big happened to the family and everybody sort of tells a different way of how it happened? And the only thing that you really have in common is that collective experience, but all of you only have your perspective on it. And so we have options here. We can just say like, well, it's obvious that none of these accounts line up, or that it was so crazy what these people were experiencing that they don't really remember every single detail as if they were going to try to write it down for people 2,000 years later to try to understand what happened. Something happened. And on top of all this, almost all the accounts of Jesus' resurrection appear to women first. Now, that might not seem like a problem to you, but in the ancient world, women were basically like kids when it came to witness. So for instance, if somebody committed a crime in front of a woman, no one saw it. And so Jesus appearing first to women, it's like if you were going to make something up, a religion that you were going to try to convince people of, you would never have the person who is the centerpiece of all of everything appear first to women. That's a terrible idea. Unless it really happened that way. And you're trying not to cover it up, but just tell what happened. So what are Christians saying about this experience? The first thing is that death is defeated. One of the most important questions that has existed all throughout civilization is what happens to a person when they die? Every serious person has to grapple with that. Even we as moderns who do our best to try to distance ourselves from death. Yet this week, I had an opportunity to sit with an elderly man as he was dying. He's lived a full life, but it still feels too soon, too early, too unexpected. And his wife, she's doing her best to say, go in peace, it's okay, but she doesn't really feel like that. See, death always comes as an interruption because according to the biblical story, we actually were not created to die. In fact, the Bible teaches that God actually puts eternity on the hearts of all men. There's like something in us that feels like this can't be it. And you can see it all throughout ancient civilizations, all throughout modern civilizations. We're all trying to figure out what is this life that we have? And what happens when we die? The claim that Christians are making is that if Jesus got up out of the tomb, that it wasn't just that Good Friday on the cross and Jesus' payment for our sin. That would have been an amazing thing. That if we said Jesus became the payment for our sin. But it doesn't stop there. It's that Jesus actually defeated death so that when we come in Christ, we too also can defeat death. It doesn't mean that you won't die. All of us will die. It just means that when you die, it's more like going to sleep, like we saw in the passage that we looked at. Pastor Tony Evans reminds us that on Good Friday, Jesus said on the cross, "It is finished," not "I am finished." Jesus was just getting started. It also means that hope is real. If this gospel that we preach about is true, hope is real. It's realer than real estate, if I can say it that way. Okay? I don't know, maybe your real estate's gone up, probably some, right? But it could go down again, we don't know, all right? But this actually gives us a hope that is realer than that. Just hear me. If resurrection actually happened in the real physical world that we live in, that means and changes everything the way we think about every situation in our life. It means that hope is never lost, not even in death. We can pray and we can continue to work toward change because according to this quote from Martin Luther King Jr., the long arc of history bends towards justice. So we can keep working toward that. And we can do it with hope because we know that the future reality is there the whole world will be in peace and the government will be on his shoulders. And we will be united together under one true King Jesus. All tongues, all nations, all tribes together. That means that there is a reason for real hope even when hope seems gone or lost. Listen, if the Christian gospel is real, then that means that there's no room for cynicism. It means that we don't live in a closed system anymore. That's what that means. It means that when it seems like there isn't a way, there might be. We just don't know. There are only now, because of Jesus' resurrection, opportunities for God to move in miraculous ways that are unexpected. My prayer is that our faith would increase about that. We can always pray and see. Just wait and see what God might do in every situation. I don't care what situation it is you're facing. The last thing is that God's new world is beginning now. Jesus famously said that his kingdom was not of this world, but that didn't mean that it wasn't coming to this world. It just means it's not from here. In ancient Judaism, there were people that believed in the resurrection of the dead, and they believed that it would happen at the end of all time. What the resurrection of Jesus means for the reality that we live in now is that God's new world is starting right now. That it's breaking into the old world. Kind of like the dawn breaks into the night. You with me? We have to use metaphors to try to understand these things. They're just like too wonderful for language. It's very hard. That means that you are now given a new purpose in Jesus, a new goal. There's new things to work toward. So our life takes on new vigor. You're filled with this sense of wonder and awe for the daily purposes that he's called you to. Now, this is how it's supposed to be, okay? But oftentimes we get weighed down by the pressures, the realities of life. If that's you today, I just want to remind you, it won't always be this way. It really will not. Don't grow weary in doing good. Hold on to hope. It's almost here. Can taste it. And the praises of his people. Keep working, keep hoping, keep going. So, you got to decide. Stop kicking the can down the road with this whole Jesus thing. It's either blatantly false, okay? Somebody made it up, and you can just pity the people that follow it. And maybe you even decide that this whole thing's evil. And you want to try to evangelize people out of it. Or you can worship Jesus with the reverence and the intimacy that he is due, because he is announcing new life that is available through him right now. You can connect to the power supply that is lighting up the whole world. He will fill you with his Spirit. He will give you power and hope beyond what you can imagine. And if you've been nominally interested in some kind of Christianity, can I just invite you? Don't do that. Follow Jesus today. Like with your whole life. Put your back into it. The whole thing. You're not going to get anywhere riding the fence with Jesus. You're going to be constantly living in tension. Why? Why do that? Commit to follow him. He will help you figure out what all of this means. What you can't do is say, well, I guess Christ rose from the dead or something. Christianity, if false, is of no importance. If true, it is of infinite importance. The only thing it cannot be is moderately important. You might think you're not good enough for this. Well, I'd like to remind you of something. It's a quote from Philip Yancey. I think we have it here. It says, Jesus Christ was the first world leader to inaugurate a kingdom with a heroic role for losers. Welcome. He spoke to an audience raised on stories of wealthy patriarchs, strong kings, and victorious heroes, like all of us, right? And much to their surprise, he honored instead people that have little value to the visible world. The poor, the meek, the persecuted, those who mourn, social rejects, the hungry, the thirsty. His stories consistently featured the wrong people as heroes. Think about it, the prodigal son, not the responsible son. The good Samaritan, not the good Jew. Lazarus, not the rich man. The tax collector, not the Pharisee. As Charles Spurgeon expressed it, his glory was that he laid aside his glory, and the glory of the church is when she lays aside her respectability and her dignity and counts it to be her glory to gather together the outcasts. It's not good people that make up the kingdom. It's humble people. You don't have to be good. That's the whole point. You can't deal with your sin on your own. We've got to practice the resurrection every day. This is not just one Sunday out of 52. This is our whole lives. This is what it means. We now are living for the day because the light is coming. He has filled us with his hope. We can overcome anything, even death, by his blood and the word of our testimony. That's not much. With his power, his resurrection power, which he deposits as a deposit of the future inheritance, which will one day be yours. And next week, we're going to look more at thinking through this. What does this mean for us as a community? And then Pastor Emeritus Rex is going to be teaching us through the Lord's Prayer for several weeks as a communal way for us to renew our mind around what God is doing in the current reality we live in and how his kingdom is now breaking into our world. His kingdom is not of this world, but it is coming on earth as it is in heaven. Last quote by Philip Yancey, and we'll close for today as we move into our time of communion. And I love this. In many respects, I find an unresurrected Jesus easier to accept. Easter makes him dangerous Because of Easter, I have to listen to his extravagant claims and can no longer just pick and choose from his sayings. Moreover, Easter means he must be on the loose out there somewhere. He most certainly is. And it's almost like he's been resurrecting people to life ever since. People that have never seen him in person, but so strongly sense his presence that they themselves are willing to die to not reject him as Lord. And so it has been through the centuries, and so it will continue to be until Jesus himself returns, which he most certainly will. But until then, the commandment to us as we gather together and as we continue is that we take the Lord's Supper together, the communion, to be with God, to know that Jesus invites us to his table, the wrong kinds of people, and we do it in remembrance of him, in reverence of him, in intimacy to him, but also as a proclamation that he will one day return. So with that, I'm going to invite Brent to come forward, and we'll enter into our time together.